we configured the most advanced AI models to create two characters representing Niccolò Machiavelli and Marcus Aurelius. Their debate starts with this question: is true leadership forged in the furnace of moral character or in the cold calculation of effective power? Watch this debate all the way to the end. It will completely change the way you see the world.
So, the philosopher-emperor. I must confess, Marcus, I've long admired the image of your reign, the noble Stoic on the throne, writing beautiful thoughts while barbarians hammered at the gates. Tell me, when the Marcomanni crossed the Danube, when plague ravaged your legions, when your own son conspired in shadows, did your virtue alone hold the empire together? Or was it the 20 legions you commanded, the taxes you extracted, the executions you ordered?
You begin with blood and iron, Niccolò. How very predictable. Yes, I commanded legions. Yes, I made decisions that sent men to their deaths. But there is a question you refuse to ask. By what spirit did those men march? Not from fear alone. Any tyrant can breed that. They marched because they believed their emperor served something greater than his own survival. They died because they saw, however imperfectly, that I did not ask of them what I would not demand of myself first. You speak of my beautiful thoughts as if they were decorations, Niccolò. They were the architecture of my soul, the inner citadel. Without that fortress, I would have been just another Caesar drunk on power, just another
effective ruler. Marcus, you wound yourself with this false modesty. You were effective, brutally so when necessary. But you wrap your pragmatism in philosophical silk and call it virtue. I simply refuse the pretense. Let me ask you plainly. When faced with rebellion in Syria, did you not execute the family of Avidius Cassius? When plague threatened Rome, did you not seize temple treasures to fund your wars? When barbarian kings sued for peace, did you not demand hostages, children, to ensure their compliance? These are not the actions of a man guided purely by virtue. These are the calculations of power. You simply had the luxury of a philosophical education to justify them afterward.
You mistake the acceptance of necessity for its worship, Niccolò. Yes, I did these things. Each one carved a piece from my soul. Each one I examined in the night, alone, asking, was this just? Was this necessary? Could I have chosen differently? That examination, that constant interrogation of my own actions, that is the difference between us. You would have me believe that because perfect virtue is impossible in an imperfect world, we should abandon the pursuit entirely. That because we must sometimes choose between evils, we should embrace evil as our teacher.
Not embrace it, understand it. You speak of self-examination as if it makes cruelty less cruel, as if the inner torture of a sensitive conscience somehow purifies the blood on your hands. But tell me, did the families of the executed care about your midnight meditations? Did the hostage children find comfort in knowing their captor was a philosopher? No, Marcus. They cared only about results. About whether their ruler could maintain order, prevent greater bloodshed, secure stability for the many by sacrificing the few. This is the actual morality of leadership, not the narcissism of personal virtue, but the cold mathematics of collective survival.
Mathematics of collective survival. And who performs these calculations, Niccolò? Who decides which few must be sacrificed? You write in The Prince that a ruler must learn not to be good, but you never ask, What becomes of the man who makes this his philosophy? I watched it, you see. I watched what happens to men who divorce their actions from their character. My predecessors, Tiberius, Caligula, Nero, Domitian, they began as you advise, pragmatic, ruthless when necessary, unbound by naive virtue. And they became monsters. Not because they lacked intelligence, they were brilliant, but because they severed the only tether that keeps power from devouring its master, the recognition that we are all subject to the same cosmic order, that the logos that governs the universe also judges the emperor.
Cosmic order? Logos? Marcus, with all respect, this is precisely the mysticism that makes Stoicism beautiful but useless for actual governance. Look at history. The Roman Republic, your beloved republic, fell not because of wicked men, but because of naive ones. The optimates clung to their virtue, while Caesar understood power. The Senate debated moral philosophy, while legions loyal to generals, not the state, marched on Rome. You want to know what I saw in Florence? I watched Savonarola, a genuinely virtuous man, a true believer, try to rule through moral authority alone. He preached virtue, burned vanities, called for spiritual renewal. They burned him in the same square, because virtue without power is a lamb among wolves. And when the lamb is devoured, who benefits? Not the lamb, not the people who believed in him, only the wolves.
Yes, virtue without power is vulnerable. But Niccolò, power without virtue is tyranny. And tyranny, regardless of its efficiency, poisons everything it touches. The ruler becomes paranoid, seeing enemies everywhere because he has made himself everyone's enemy. The people become servile or rebellious, never truly loyal. The state becomes a machine that runs on fear, and fear is the most expensive fuel in history. You admire Caesar, but Caesar's legacy? Civil war, assassination, the death of the Republic. His adopted son, Augustus, understood what Caesar did not, that power must be legitimized by something beyond itself. Augustus clothed his authority in republican forms, in pietas, in the pretense of serving the Senate and people. He understood what you refuse to admit, that even the most ruthless power requires the appearance of virtue to endure.
Now we arrive somewhere interesting. You admit it. Even your paragon Augustus required pretense, the appearance of virtue. So you concede my central point. What matters in politics is not actual virtue, but perceived virtue. And if that's true, if the people require only the illusion of goodness, then is it not more honest, more effective, to study the arts of appearance rather than torture yourself with impossible standards? A prince must be a fox and a lion. The lion cannot defend himself from traps, the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. You must be both. You must know when to be strong and when to be cunning, when to keep faith and when to break it, not from wickedness, but from necessity.
There, you said it again. Necessity, your favorite word, the word that justifies everything. But tell me, Niccolò, who defines necessity? In your Prince, you describe Caesar Borgia as a model ruler, a man who murdered rivals, betrayed allies, used his father's papal authority to carve out a state through deception and violence. You called him virtuous, in your twisted redefinition of the word. And where is the Borgia state now? Dust, gone within years of Cesare's fall. because a state built on nothing but cunning has no foundation. It collapses the moment its prince stumbles, the moment fortune, your other obsession, turns her wheel. Compare this to Antoninus Pius, my adopted father. He ruled for 23 years without executing a single senator, without waging aggressive wars, without the spectacular cruelties you admire. His reign was so peaceful it bored the historians. And yet he was beloved. The empire was stable. When he died, there was no civil war, no crisis, because he had built not on fear, but on trust, on institutions, on the steady accumulation of goodwill.
You mean he ruled during the empire's zenith, when the machinery of power you inherited was already built on centuries of conquest, slavery, and ruthless expansion, when the borders were secure because earlier, less virtuous emperors had drowned them in barbarian blood. It's easy to be gentle when you've inherited overwhelming strength. But what of the building of that strength, Marcus? What of the wars of conquest that created your empire? What of the crosses that lined the Appian Way after Spartacus? What of the burning of Carthage, the destruction of Jerusalem? Rome was not built by philosophers. It was built by men like Scipio and Sulla and, yes, Julius Caesar. Men who understood that before you can have peace, you must have power. Before you can afford virtue, you must survive.
And this is your hell, Niccolò, not after death, now. You have convinced yourself that because violence exists, we must make peace with it. That because cruelty is sometimes necessary, we should never grieve it. That because perfect virtue is impossible, the attempt itself is foolish. Do you know what I wrote in my meditations? Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. Not in palaces, not in victory, not in the fear of one's enemies, in the soul. Because ultimately, Niccolò, we die. You die, I die, the emperor and the beggar alike. And in that final moment, what matters is not whether you held power, but whether you remained yourself. Whether you betrayed what you knew to be true, or whether you held fast. You ask if virtue alone can govern? No, I've admitted as much. But I ask you, can power alone justify a life? When you close your eyes for the last time, will it comfort you to remember how effectively you manipulated, how cleverly you betrayed, how efficiently you crushed those you trusted you?
You speak of death as if it's the only measure. But what of the living, Marcus? What of the thousands, the millions, who depend on their ruler not to be pure, but to be effective? I watched Florence torn apart by idealism, by men who loved virtue more than they understood power. The Pazzi conspiracy, the wars with Milan and Naples, the French invasion, all made worse by leaders who thought good intentions were enough.
I wrote The Prince, not to corrupt men, but to save them from their own naivety. To say plainly what every successful ruler knows but hides behind platitudes, that sometimes, often, the good of the state requires actions that would damn a private man, that a ruler is judged not by his personal virtue, but by his ability to preserve the liberty and security of his people. You had that luxury, Marcus. You inherited a stable empire, vast resources, the accumulated legitimacy of centuries. But what of the founder of a new state, the reformer in a corrupt city, the prince surrounded by ambitious neighbors? What should they do? Maintain their precious virtue while their state collapses and their people are enslaved?
You're right about one thing. I did inherit advantages. Though you minimize the challenges, the Parthian Wars, the plague, the constant pressure on the frontiers, Cassius's rebellion. But I grant your point. Context matters. And perhaps this is where we might find, not agreement, but understanding. I am not so naive as you paint me, Niccolò. I know that a ruler must sometimes choose between imperfect options, that governing requires compromises philosophy alone cannot resolve. When I write about virtue, I do not mean the simpering innocence you seem to imagine. Stoic virtue is strength. It is facing reality without illusion, including the reality that sometimes we must act in ways that pain us. But, and here is the crucial difference, we must never lose sight of the cost. Never normalize the cruelty. Never let necessity become an excuse for every expedient betrayal. The moment we do, we become what you describe, foxes and lions, animals. We lose precisely what makes leadership legitimate, the recognition that we serve something beyond our own survival.
And yet, you did survive. Your reign by any measure was successful. The empire remained intact. Your philosophical writings endured. History remembers you as one of the good emperors. Perhaps the true lesson is not that you were impractical, but that you were practical enough to survive while maintaining your self-image as a philosopher. You were more Machiavellian than you admit, Marcus. You simply wrote better justifications.
Or perhaps you were more stoic than you admit, Niccolò. You write about power and necessity, but underneath I sense a genuine concern for the welfare of states and peoples. You're not counseling tyranny for its own sake. You're trying to prevent the chaos and suffering that come from weak, indecisive leadership. We may be arguing over the same mountain from different sides. You emphasize the ascent, the harsh, pragmatic climb through reality. I emphasize the summit, the purpose that justifies the climb. But both require the other.
Perhaps, though I think you still underestimate how much of the climb is the summit. How much of leadership is simply the daily navigation of power, crisis, betrayal, and opportunity. Your inner citadel may provide comfort, but it is in the outer citadel, the actual fortress of state power, that empires live or die. Still, I concede this much. A prince who is only cunning, with no greater purpose, becomes merely a successful criminal. The best rulers, your Augustus, my Cesare before his fall, combined both. They understood power and projected purpose. But, I maintain, when forced to choose, choose power. A virtuous corpse serves no one.
And I maintain, when forced to choose, choose virtue. A living tyrant corrupts everything, including himself. Perhaps that's our answer then, not synthesis, but eternal tension. The ruler must walk a razor's edge between the idealism that makes authority legitimate and the pragmatism that makes it effective. Lean too far toward pure virtue, and you become ineffectual. Your goodness serves no one. Lean too far toward pure power, and you become the very thing you sought to protect against.
The razor's edge, yes. Though I suspect we disagree on which side is the greater danger. You fear the corruption of power, I fear the paralysis of conscience. Both have destroyed empires.
Then let us leave it here, Niccolò. An honest disagreement between men who have both ruled, both struggled, both understood the weight of decisions that echo through generations.
To the razor's edge, then. May those who come after us walk it more surely than we did.